There's nothing quite like IU's Little 500 bike race. We're going to be looking at legendary Wayne Stetina, his ride in the Little Five, the Olympics, and what he's doing now on Fitfoot U.
Bike team right now. Mark, what can you tell about the team? It's just great to be on it this year. Stetina, who's out there on the bike right now, Wayne Stetina, rode the Olympics 72, is just phenomenal the way he's riding. He's the one that brought us back up after our wreck at the beginning of the race, and he's going now, in fact, right there. Wayne Stetina and Gary Rybar, both from Indianapolis. We've all ridden together for quite a while. Well, you guys have got a great lead here. Do you think the bike has anything to do with that, or just conditioning?
Hey everybody, this is Dr. Ben Pearl. So today I am really excited to have a fellow IU alum, a Hall of Fame rider with the Little 500, an Olympian in the Cycling Hall of Fame. I mean, I don't know how you can have any more trophies and honors. And then he comes to tell me in our pre-interview that he's was a Pi Beta Kappa in the business school. So not only is a jock, but he's really smart. And without further ado, he's going to talk to us about what made him an IU cycling and in particular Little 500 legend, this being Little 5 Week. And also he's involved in the Ride for Mental Health in New Paltz with one of his Olympic colleagues, also a cyclist, and he's going to tell us about that. Welcome. I'm so thrilled to have you.
Well, thanks, Ben. Yeah, the Mac Doris started the Ride for Mental Health, and his son had had some issues and became addicted to drugs and died of an overdose when they thought he was going to recover. So there weren't enough resources, and he started a fondo for that. It's the rideformentalhealth.org. That's coming up June 21st and 22nd of this year. And he had reached out to me in previous years, and I tried to get Schramm involved, but they just didn't have the manpower, bandwidth, or the budget to add any more events. And now that I've retired, I thought, I'll go do that ride. And the first thing I thought was, Nelson Vales has been inviting me to his fondos that he does in New York, just across the George Washington Bridge. And this is the same area. I'm going to invite Nelson because there's nobody that's more fun to hang out with.
Yeah, you'll have to share some stories. But before we get to that, tell me a little bit about what made you a Little 5 legend. You have some unique perspectives on track cycling and road cycling and how it integrated and the strengths and weaknesses that translated to the track.
Well, first, the thing that got me to go to IU was that Eddie Van Gijs recruited me. I knew Eddie as a bike racer, and he was a national track champion. He was an endurance track rider, and that made him a very good rider at Little 5 because it wasn't a sprint. But Little 5 is unique on the cinders because you can't really draft the same way. You can't sprint flat out. When you start riding fast laps on like 34-second laps for a quarter mile, 30 seconds would be 30 miles an hour. And maybe 32 seconds when you're really, really on it on the old cinder track. Now it's a faster surface. But when I was racing, you had to coast into the turn and then accelerate the bike out of each turn. So riders like Eddie had a lot of endurance, but compared to me on the road, I was in a different zip code for endurance, and this was power intervals. Reaccelerate the bike every time out of the corner. So even if somebody was drafting me, I could make them hurt just to follow me by accelerating over and over and over. And I could just keep recovering. So this was perfect for my wheelhouse. And the bikes have balloon tires, 26-inch Now I think they may be 700C now on the faster track. AMFs, they weighed 35 pounds and they had a 46 18 gear, I think. It was like, as soon as you're riding fast, you're always 120 RPM or more the whole time. So, of course, Little Five is 4-rider teams, and you have to exchange the bike. And I hated exchanges. You can get hurt, you can drop the bike. Getting off, it's pretty easy. You just lock the brakes up and slide the bike in and step off the seat. But getting on, you got to run, and it's hard to step on the pedal. So you just got to jump up and land on the seat at a full run. If you keep your momentum, it's like, I'm not going to do that. You could really hurt yourself. I'm going to do a slower exchange. I'll make it up later. The first year, I didn't know what I was getting into, and I spent how the race was going to go because it was all new. I spent a lot of laps on the track. It's like cyclocross. You're sliding on the cinders, and you got to get used to sliding around, that the bike is moving all the time. And you learn just how hard you can go in the turns, how soon you can get on the power. And
you had tighter turns, by the way, in the old.
well, it was a long, narrow track, and
Yeah.
you'd put 20,000 people in the stands. So Eddie, in 1971, had one of my close friends, Steve Dayton, who had traveled to, afterwards, he traveled to Oregon with our family in a motorhome, and he wound up winning the senior national road race. He's a very strong rider. And with him and Eddie together, there was almost no way they could possibly lose in 71. But Eddie got the flu. They had half the race. It got called for rain. They're going to do the next half the next day. And unfortunately, since Eddie was sick, Steve was the guy. And Steve liked to ride at the back and go take a flyer. But when he's looking at the lap cards, he thought he had one more lap because he's at the back. They would flip the cards after they went through. So he thinks he has 2 laps to go. He's like 20 riders deep, and he gets the bell, 1 to go, and almost won the race. He came within a half a bike length of passing everybody and winning the race. If he'd started from the front, he would have won the race by 20 yards. So, Eddie had recruited me to go to Delta Chi, and Delta Chi was a party house. They were a fun time, not noted for their academic excellence. And it wasn't quite Animal House, but it was the closest that IU had to Animal House. And I was going to go there, and I decided to stay out of college. I had already graduated a year early. I stayed out of college to speed skate for several months over the winter and then train to make the Olympic team at 18, which I succeeded in doing in 1972. So I didn't go to school. And otherwise, I would have been on the team with Eddie Van Gys and Steve Dayton that probably should have easily won no matter what. It was their race to lose. So I wound up riding the first 66 laps in 1973 and thought.
And that's just after the Olympics.
Well, I actually started school 3 weeks late because of the Olympic timing. And I was thinking I wouldn't go to school, but then I was going to lose a national merit scholarship if I didn't go. So financially, that wasn't a consideration. I'm just going to start late and catch up, which I did without a problem. So yeah, our team had 2 of younger brothers of Steve Dayton, Mark, who had raced a bike, and he had a weakness for too much beer. So that hurt his fitness. And then the third brother, Mark, who was actually a very good rider, faster than I was as a sprinter, but he was like a 130-pound, very wiry guy. And so for him, the bikes were too big. And that was a handicap for me at 170 pounds. It didn't bother me to have a 35-pound bike compared to a guy that was, 35 pounds lighter than I was. That was just too much for him to drag around. And he was not really an endurance rider. He was quick and he was very fit, but I had the shortest leg. So I got the tallest. There were some, I think I got a pair of Nikes that had real tall soles on them. And that way everybody else could get the right height. For Mike and Mark, they were comfortable. I rode it as high as I could because our fourth rider was really tall and he was at a huge disadvantage because he had to ride the bike with the seat probably 2 to 3 inches lower than it should have been for him. But, we needed a fourth rider. And so after I got back on the bike the second time, there was a crash. I couldn't avoid the guy without hitting the wall. And so I ran over his helmet, flipped, landed on my feet, running at 20 miles an hour as fast as I could go, skidded to a stop, went back, grabbed my bike out of the pile. And when I went to chase, the tire was coming out of the bead. So I had to make a bike change. And instead of me continuing, we made the coaches wanted the other guys to ride. And by the time they had all ridden and I got back on the bike, we were within 10 yards of going a lap down. So I put my head down and I unlapped us. And I was in tunnel vision just as I caught the back of the field. But fortunately, the two Dayton brothers were plenty strong to get back to the front. And I needed about 15 minutes to recover after that effort. I have never gone deeper in my life than I went to unlap. Being a rookie, I had more racing experience over my starting at age 12 or 11 than all of the people in Little Five combined in the field. So when they do an exchange, teams sprint off the front to get a lead so that the guy can make the exchange and get in at the front. He's not in the back or chasing. And so it immediately occurred to me, even in practice, that all the teams that we were worried about, every time they went to do an exchange, instead of going with them, I would just bring the field up to speed and pace them up to a full sprint so that we would catch the team doing the exchange just as they were exchanging. And then a lot of them dropped the bike. A lot of the big teams had gone a lap down in the first 50 laps with that tactic. Finally, I wound up running 144 laps, I think I recall, by the end of the race. And I was pretty tired still.
I believe, by the way, is still a record.
Could be. Well, we only did 9 exchanges. And the one rider, the taller guy, he was in a position where he jumped on the bike, had to sprint. He wound up doing 3 laps before we brought him in. Otherwise, if he'd done a 4th lap, we would have gone a lap down. So in retrospect, I've realized strategically, I should have given up the lap. I should have warmed up. I should have waited for another team to do an exchange. And instead of bringing the field, just popped on their wheel for a half a lap sprint. I would have been resting on their wheel up to full speed with a quarter lap on the rest of the group. I would have already been at speed with a quarter lap and my momentum, and it would be easier to unlap that way, because that's exactly what I did the following year when I had a team with Mark Dayton, Gary Rybar, and Mike Alexander, all Hall of Fame riders at Little Five, they were capable of winning without me. And when I would take the first 3/4 of a lap, there was no reason for me to exhaust myself trying to take the full lap, because I give it to them and they could easily bring it home. Even just one of them could bring back the rest of the lap, then exchange, and then the next one would go to the front. And we still had a guy who hadn't even got on the bike yet in reserve. And by that time, I was recovered as well. So anyway, we were that year in the sprint, I was up against a guy that had Nelson Vale's speed. This guy would have been national track team if he had been a serious full-time bike racer. And so I realized that I needed to control the sprint from the front, because he couldn't draft me and take a flyer and come around like he could on a bank track. I wouldn't have had a prayer to beat him. And he was leading. And with 1 to go, I came up next to him on the home stretch as we crossed the line, put my handlebars in front of his, and just looked at him and grinned. It's like, okay, you're stuck. You can't go anywhere. I own you right now. And yeah, I was the rookie. He was the veteran. So as soon as we hit the turn, we didn't go into the turn very fast. I accelerated as fast as I could all the way around the turn and sprinted flat out the entire backstretch. And by the time we went into the last turn on the far end of the track, he was ahead of me by about a wheel. He had already come by me and passed me, but he was outside, and then we were coasting. So then I was back ahead of him, and there was nothing he could do. He wound up trying to pedal too early because he knew that he couldn't catch me by the middle of the finish line, and he hit a pedal and got a little sideways. I beat him by 2 lengths, but it was a purely tactical victory. The following year, as I said, we had a team that could have won without me, and they did qualifications without me, and they got second. They didn't get the pole position. They just missed by 1/10 of a second. I went to a bike race. The day before Little Five, I suddenly realized I'd been training really hard. I realized you should go to the track and readjust yourself to the cinders, because it's different. So, okay, I go to the track. I do about 40 laps. I come back to the house at dinner, and I make an announcement. I ask the guys, everyone in the fraternity is there, do you want to win by 2 laps or 3 tomorrow? And everybody's like, you can't call that. And I said, with this team, 2 laps is easy. In the race, we wound up taking 2 laps not long after 100 laps into the race. And so at that point, one of the riders from the team that got second the year before, not the sprinter, actually stronger than any other individual on our team, he was a friend that we did a lot of training together. And I had decided beforehand that no matter what went down, I was going to help him get second. And it turned out that he was sick. He was not having a good day. I think he had the flu. And so I spent the last 50 or 60 laps making sure that he got second, which he did. And on that clip
the field was 2 laps down.
Yeah, the field was 2 laps down. On that clip you've got, as soon as I saw that clip, I looked like, oh, that's a bike rider. The way he's following me, that's not a Little Five guy. That's a bike racer.
When's the last time you saw that clip?
I'd never seen it before, but I just recognized how he was following my wheel as I went around the corners, as I moved around. He was just right with me, and he was close. He, was tight. It was like, that guy knows how to ride. He knows how to, as Nelson would say, he knows how to sit the wheel. Because, I mean, that's the interesting thing that most people don't understand about the bike racing that I do, especially most of the racing in the US is criteriums, which is a short 1 mile course with a lot of sharp turns. And a 50-mile race will, a few years later, they were routinely taking about an hour and 45 minutes to go 50 miles. Average speeds well over 30 for a 50-mile race. Bike racing with drafting, if you can imagine that you take a sprinter like Usain Bolt or Michael Johnson, who won the 200 and 400 meter gold medal in one of the Olympics, maybe that was in Georgia, Athens, Georgia, Atlanta. I think that if you could, in a bike race, if they could follow stride for stride behind the strongest marathon runner and survive to the finish by the drafting effort, because the guy in front is doing 20 to 30% more work than the rider behind, you can imagine that they would unleash their sprint in the final 100 meters. They would win by 50 meters, because a marathon runner may be able to run 5-minute miles all day, but they can't go faster than a 15-second flying 100 meter. That's full speed. That's just all they've got, because that's the type of athlete they are. And so, yeah, if 60-second 4-minute mile is a full sprint for a marathon runner.
Wayne, do you want to talk real quick about the training method that you did around the football stadium?
Well, yeah. While I was training there, I found that the parking lot around the IU football stadium was about a half a mile around. And so I started developing intervals where I would pedal really hard in my big ring. And I would start maybe with an 18 or 17 and do a ladder up to 13 and then back. And about 100 revolutions, accelerating in the saddle really hard, coast down the rest of the lap, which would be about a 20 to 25-second recovery interval, and then hit the next interval. And then I came up with the idea, it was hard to count, I would shift chain rings and do one interval at 140 RPM and the other one eventually at about 105 to 110 RPM as a power interval, and then a motor pace interval and a power interval. And then I started bringing my teammates to do that with me, and they would sit in when I would lead the big ring. And then when they would lead, I would use my small ring. They needed to use the big ring every time, and I'd have to get 3 or 4 other riders take turns because nobody could do every other interval with me. And I adapted that out on the road, and I would do sets of 10 intervals and do 30, and a few times I even did 40 intervals. Really, really brutally hard workouts. And I had the ability to spin or push. It didn't matter what the cadence was. And I could ride really hard in a pace line, back off for about 5 or 6 revolutions, and be recovering by the time I got back on the back end. And so those intervals became a key part of my training. And my brother Dale, who was also on the 76 and then 80 Olympic team, he never did those intervals with me. But one of my friends and teammates who became a national champion in the individual time trial for 25 miles, only rider I ever found who could do those intervals. And it was really funny because we had him on our team for years, and he said, when I started out, I just figured that eventually I'd get as strong as you and Dale, and I'd be able to keep up. He said, and now I'm stronger than either one of you, and I still can't keep up. And it's just how tactical cycling is, knowing when to use your effort. And when you make an attack, I liken it to a karate person that's breaking boards. It's like, okay, I'm going to save all my matches all day. Everybody can forget I'm here, because if they're thinking that I'm back there resting, they're not going to race each other. They're going to look for me to do the work. I want to disappear. And then when I decide to go, the right time to attack is going to be when I decide that they're looking tired, people aren't reacting, they're not chasing. And you also have to, if it's too easy and I'm not working a little bit, then if I'm a marked rider, any attack I make is doomed. I'm just going to be wasting effort. So once you understand that, the best individual is going to be, all else being equal, is going to be 3 or 4 miles an hour slower than a group of 4 to 8 highly motivated riders riding in a circular pace line. The easiest way to win a race, the best way is solo, is also the hardest way, because everybody knows where the finish is. And when you're by yourself, that can be a big problem if a group is working to chase you. My strategy in bike racing has always been, when I know the other riders, I want to be in a small group of riders that I know I'm faster than anybody else in that group. And then the race is mine to lose. I have to make a mistake. But you can't always get a breakaway. If it's a 100-mile race, it seems like it's easy to get away with 80 miles to go, with 50 miles to go. That's a suicide move. And then it gets harder and harder because I went back to Delta Chi. I was in school the semester before the 1977 race, and my brother Dale went to Delta Chi. He was also on the 76 Olympic team. So there was panic that ensued, because now you had 2 Olympians on the same team. And so there was the Stetina brothers rule that if you've ever been a member of the national team, or you're a category 1 or 2 racer, you're ineligible to ride. And I could see that. I think that was wrong about Cat 1 or 2 racer, because they took all the good riders out and they had a crash fest. They didn't have skilled, experienced riders to teach people how to ride safely in a group. And it was demolition derby. I was the coach. Our team was by far the best for Delta Chi without me. And they had a very unlucky crash. Then there was a yellow light for caution while they were clearing the crash, and our guys didn't realize it. They got a penalty. They had to come in for penalty. They went a lap down. And there was an All-American swimmer on one of the other fraternity teams that was really good. And single-handedly, he stopped our team from taking a lap back. So that just turned out, it's a thing that the more experience you get, you start to learn how to be patient. The way to have gotten that lap back would have been to mark that rider, and our guys saved their energy until he went to do an exchange, and then counterattack on top of that and put him out of contention or burn up their team. And by the time he gets back, you've unlapped him. But again, it's a very interesting event. It's a huge part of the social scene. I mean, the biggest thing on campus for the better part of a month. So
And you were there just prior then to the filming in that 77 race then. Is that correct?
well, the filming for Breaking Away, I think it was filmed in 1978.
Right. So
And I was, while it was being filmed, my brother Dale and I were in Europe. We were racing the amateur tour of Switzerland, and then we raced the amateur worlds on the Nürburgring. So we weren't able to be in the film as extras, although Eddie Van Gijs and Gary Rybar, who was my roommate in college, wound up being the double for Dennis Christopher.
right.
And he was the one that was going 60 miles an hour, honest to God, behind a semi. And the biggest blooper, and that's a great movie. I love it. The biggest blooper in the movie was that Dennis Christopher is pedaling rapidly in his small chainring while he's supposed to be drafting the semi.
But he really hit 60?
Gary did.
And did he do that?
Oh, it's no problem to go going 60 miles an hour behind a semi. That's easy. I mean, I've gone 55 miles an hour behind a motorcycle.
Did he
Behind a
catch it on the
semi.
fly or was that planned?
What?
Did he catch it on the fly or was that planned?
Well, that was part of the script.
So the truck was part of the.
Yeah, the truck was part of the movie. So
Yeah,
that he comes by, Gary jumps on it, no problem.
Yeah.
And I mean, Gary was a top 10 racer in, and he was a family friend. He went to a lot of races with us. He and my dad were, his dad and my dad were pretty close. And so he would be top 10 in Cat 1-2 races. And
It's funny you say that because I was never sure if that speed was exaggerated, if he's really like going 50 or whatever.
No, he was. I mean, you could go if you had the right, and the problem was getting enough gearing back then. But Gary was a good rider. I mean, John Howard went out on the salt flats behind a screen on a race car, and the average speed in two directions was 152 miles an hour on a bicycle with a massive gear one gear. They had to push him up to 60. The gear was so big that he couldn't get on top of it. And then he's going finally at about 150 RPM, and he had the throttle because if he came off the draft of that car, the windscreen, and the wind hit him, it was going to knock him right off the bike. I mean, anybody to understand how cycling works and why drafting's so effective, put your hand out of the car window at 30 miles an hour, and it's hard to hold your hand there. There's a lot of force. If you're going to go 2 times faster, it takes 4 times more power. So to increase, to go from 20 to 40 miles an hour takes 4 times as much wattage. And I mean, you get in the back of a big field and you're going, and now the pros they're rolling constantly. If they're in a hurry, they'll be going 35 or more. And you get back about 30 or 40 places, you're not even pedaling. It's like you're drafting a semi. I mean, when a field of 100 riders goes by, you get hit with a blast of air. Like if you're stopped on the shoulder and a semi goes by you on the highway and you feel your car rock. I mean, you can feel it as they go by. It's that kind of force. Air is pretty thick. It's really interesting how that changes and how the tactics revolve around teams getting their sprinter to the finish and making sure he's got a position where he can sprint. And, you know, it seems like it would be a crapshoot because it's like a washing machine. And this is the reason I didn't like track riding, is because there's a great deal of bumping and intimidation and the ability to ride your bike and push other people out of, everybody wants the same real estate and they can't all be there. In a criterium, everyone wants to be second or third through the last turn. Since everybody knows that, they can't all be there. That's what makes it difficult to execute. I mean, a bike race is you ride around in a circle and somebody wins. And the only thing that matters is that your tire is ahead right when you cross the finish line. because unless it's a stage race, you don't get bonus points for winning by minutes. You win or you lose.
Well, I got to ask you this. You're one of maybe a handful, I don't know how many total there are, maybe a half dozen of riders that have been both in the Little Five and the Olympics. I think Jimmy Pollock was one,
Yes,
I believe.
he was an incredible talent, and you could see why he was. He continued to progress after he left Little Five, and very
Ask you
talented
this.
rider.
You're one of maybe a handful, I don't know how many total there are, maybe a half dozen of riders that have been both in the Little Five and the Olympics. I think Jimmy Pollock was one,
Yes,
I believe.
he was an incredible talent, and you could see why he was. He continued to progress after he left Little Five, and very talented rider.
Yeah. What was more exciting to you, winning that Little Five or being involved with the Olympics, or and maybe the experiences were different in terms of how you measure excitement?
Well, the actual competition when you got 20,000 screaming and a lot of them, frankly, drunken students with brown paper bags, that is really electric. And so there's nothing normally like that in this country in cycling.